Welcome, listeners, to the second episode of Beyond the Book, Absurdism and the Meaning of Life. I am Marissa, your podcast host. Today, we're exploring the existential themes of absurdism and the search for meaning in life as portrayed in Albert Camus' novel, The Stranger. Since its first publication in 1942, this novel has captivated readers with its insightful exploration of alienation and its challenge to conventional morality. In our discussion today, we will focus on the protagonist Meursault, his nature and psychology, and how his life experiences are connected to the theme of absurdism. Year 12 Chinese and French literature students will be interviewing our distinguished guests from St. Andrew's International School in Bangkok, Miss Sasha, the psychology teacher, and Miss Tessa, our counselor. Let's get started with our first question. Hello, Miss Sasha. In light of the quote from The Stranger, Maman died today, or perhaps yesterday, I don't know, how could one interpret the indifference of a son towards the passing of his mother's death?
Firstly, thank you for having me. I'm very honoured to be joining this podcast episode. I think the whole book is centred around this idea between and the relationship between existentialism and absurdism. And I think from the start of the book, you can see that the main character, he does not live in this reality and he's very much far removed from society, and therefore what we expect a reader to feel when someone's mother dies is emotion and grief, and to be moved by that. From the get-go, you see that this character isn't, and so from the start we can interpret and feel that they are very much not part of society, and kind of living in their own world.
So, hello, I am Tiffany. Miss Tessa, considering the court for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. This court reflects the absurd nature of human existence. Why, in your opinion, would anybody wish for such an end?
Great question. Thank you for having me as well. So full disclosure, I have not read the book. I did go on Goodreads for the summary, but this particular quote wasn't on what I was reading on the interwebs. But what I can share with you were my first reflections when I was reading it and what first came to mind. And then I'm hoping that the listeners and you guys can help me see if that fits the picture that you've built of the character. So when I read the quote, for me to feel less alone, I only wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution and that they greet me with cries of hate. The first thing that came to mind was everyone's deep desire to feel seen, to feel wanted. And working with young people, working with adults, even from a young kid, all you want is for somebody to be there for you, and to be seen as a human being. Now, I don't know what this character's background is, but even if the only way you are seen, the only way you can get attention from the people around you is through negativity, is through hate, for some people, that experience of being seen, even if it is through hate, is better than not being seen at all, because not being seen at all could also pose the questions of what's my point of even being here. So if at least I'm hated, at least I've had a purpose, I've done something with my life enough to be seen.
So, hello, I'm Alice. Miss Sasha, this is a question for you. In light of the quote, I explained to her that it didn't really matter and that if she wanted to, we could get married. Why do you think the character responds to his lover Marie with such indifference, not even attempting to reassure or engage emotionally with her?
So, again, I read this book many, many years ago, but if I do remember correctly, I think the relationship he has with her, I felt when I was reading the book, he doesn't see her as someone, like he's not in a relationship with her to get that emotional attachment from, and he sees her almost as just a body in his life that exists kind of next to him but not with him. And so I think that's sort of the basis of him being so indifferent towards. He doesn't really care. It won't offend him if they don't get married. He'll do it, but she's just there, and he doesn't really see her as someone that would really add to his life, but she's not someone that would really take away from his life as well. So I think he's quite indifferent because she's just there and he's not really that bothered.
Miss Tessa, in light of the court anyway after that, remembering Mary meant nothing to me. I wasn't interested in her death. How do you interpret from a psychological standpoint Mary's so detachment attitude toward his loved one's memory?
Well, again, when I read this in conjunction with the first opening quote, like his detached feelings towards his mum and his detached feelings towards his quote-unquote relationship, the first thing that came to mind was, or the questions that came to mind rather was, why wasn't he attached in the first place in two of these primary roles in his life? What had happened to him for him not to feel that attachment towards others? So looking at it through the lens of what happened when he was younger to get him to this place to begin with. Because what happens when we're younger, if we aren't able to build those attachments for whatever reason, whether it's because when we tried to, it was met with hurt, or when we tried to, we realized that whoever we tried to attach to wasn't able to fulfill our needs, then we learn from a very young age that it's easier not to form attachments because it'll be easier to survive if we detach, if we rely on ourselves. And so if you go through life detaching because that's the only way you've learned how to survive, then you've got nothing to grieve because you haven't formed that attachment in the first place. So to me, again, not having read the book, but just knowing that that's how some people respond is a reason that could make sense to me.
Miss Sasha, Miss Tessa, referring to the quote, I had no place in a society whose most fundamental rules I ignored. In your views, why do you think society tends to be fearful or uneasy about individuals who deviate from its norms and expected emotional reactions?
So speaking from a sort of psychology perspective, societies are governed by norms, right? And as humans, we actually want to predict people's behavior because that makes us feel comfortable. And when people deviate from that, so if they deviate from social norms, that makes people feel uncomfortable. And so I think that's why, people do feel a little uneasy when there are people in society that perhaps they're not governed by these norms, right? Because, we do want to predict what people are doing at the end of the day. We want to save time. We don't want to be sort of surprised by anything. And when I'm interacting with someone else, I would have my preconceived ideas and I'll be following a script on what should happen at this moment in time with this particular interaction. And we learn that from when we're young, depending on what culture we're brought up in. And so I think when people deviate from that, then us as humans, we get really confused. Mm-hmm. And that makes us feel really uncomfortable, makes us feel frustrated and things like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Ditto. The only other thing that came to mind, which I think is something you actually already touched upon, was that when people don't follow the script of the way we've been socialized to behave in certain situations, either that makes people feel angry, like why did they not behave that way, or scared, why didn't they behave that way, same question but just different emotion, and neither of those are very nice feelings to feel, and both of those are very I don't know if projective is the right word, but makes us want to do something to fix the problem. But sometimes when we don't know how to fix it, that scares us even more.
Well, it looks like we've reached the end of this enlightening discussion. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our esteemed guests from St. Andrew's International Schools in Bangkok, Miss Sasha and Miss Tessa, for sharing their rich perspectives and insights. Your contribution have undoubtedly helped us all better understand the complex feeling shaping absurdism and the search for meaning in life. And a big thank you to our Year 12 students interviewers for their thoughtful questions that drove this engaging conversation. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Beyond the Book, Absurdism and the Meaning of Life. We hope it has inspired you. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more compelling discussions in future episodes. Goodbye.